So my brain's been thinking, we've been playing like Tokon, you know? We know where Marvel's going. Here's this thought process that's been going through my head right now. Because usually Capcom just doesn't sit on one thing and just do one thing. Historically, they're working on multiple projects in the background in some way. Like, that's just happening. So in my head, I'm looking at the possibilities. Street Fighter isn't going to be the only Capcom game that's a fighting game that they want to likely produce. And clearly, Street Fighter did very well. It is definitely going to make it a lot easier for similar governing bodies that were responsible for all the success in Capcom's latest fighting game division to hopefully produce something else that could allow things to be successful and bring just as much success. Because Street Fighter 6 is it's honestly doing crazy, the legs that game has. And it's still not nearly as discounted as games like Street Fighter 5 was at the time. Street Fighter 5 was much cheaper, dude. Like, that game was going down to $15 within a 2-year time span after its release. They were trying to get you to buy that shit. So 6 is still at least $30 even on sales. So my brain just starts thinking, it's already been 2 years. We're getting closer to 3 years that the game has existed. What are the possibilities? The first one that I thought was pretty obvious after the collection and all the subsequent merchandise and all these different things that were happening around it, updates, all this kind of stuff, the hope of a new tomorrow type of shit, was Marvel vs. Capcom. Before a faithful state of play in June of 2025, I thought that was all but a guarantee. Now it's not. We went from there being a 1 in 14,605 chance of the game happening to now an actual reality. Like, no, dude, this we could be in that one universe. This is it. Now we're back to square one. Like, we are 100% back to square one on the hopeful MVC future. If there is a future for Marvel vs. Capcom with a brand new game, like an actual brand new game, dude, that is going to take such a long period of time. Like, Tokon needs to be out and exist and find its success, which it will. It'll be successful. It needs to be a thing that is clearly different than MVC, which it is, and to have its audience and continue to thrive in some way. Like, that just needs to be a thing that exists, right? So with that being said, it's going to take a very long time, if at all, for MVC to even do anything, for it to exist in any fashion with a 4 or whatever. So you have to start thinking, chances of Marvel vs. Capcom went down the drain. In the next few years, like possibly year or two, we're gonna have to get another Capcom fighting game announcement, straight up. I don't know at what point it could happen, but I definitely feel like it's already very late. Considering Street Fighter 6's success, it already is really late. That game had a great first-year sales. You would be surprised that they didn't immediately jump on board with another fighting game in production at some way, but who knows? Things just take a long time at Capcom, dude. We don't even have Devil May Cry 7 yet, or 6. Damn. We should be at 7. So what is possible? Most likely thing in my brain as someone that has been staring at this shit and studying this shit for the longest period of time. The number one most likely thing that has a future is the next Capcom versus SNK. That one has now jumped to the top, straight up. CVS3 and the amount of equity that SNK has, the amount of stuff that Capcom has learned, the kind of teasing of all of it happening from the SNK side, Capcom characters crossing over into SNK characters crossing over into Capcom. Like, it feels like whoever's behind the scenes is making sweet love and making out all over the place. It's like, dang, dude, SNK and Capcom need to get a room. They're up to things. Just put a ring on it already, guys. Come on. So anyway, we get a whole bunch of SNK stuff in Capcom. Capcom gets a whole bunch of SNK stuff in Fatal Fury. The clear path and route for this is a Capcom versus SNK. It's the most likely thing. And if there's anything out there, I used to think that MVC4 is probably going to be a thing first. That's not happening anymore. The Capcom versus SNK 3 draw, like the chances of getting a good draw, this is very high. I think it's really high. And I think anytime in between the next year to year after that, I wouldn't even be surprised if it happened after all these Capcom games come out. I wouldn't even be surprised if by the time, June of next year, we get an announcement of some kind. Like, that would make sense. That a Capcom versus SNK announcement could be a thing. Who's making it? That's a good question. I think Capcom's making it. Just straight up. I would prefer SNK to do it, and I think SNK has done an incredible job with, like, Ken and Chun. But SNK has a lot of money. I just personally see that they would want to emulate the success that they have had back in the day with the CVS series. And unfortunately, Capcom is the one that usually has had historically the most success in crossing over these characters, just in general. But it could be like a joint operation. They can do some interesting shit like that. They can make it together. Like, who knows? There can be some weird thing that they try to do. All I'm saying is that CVS 3, it seems like it's the most likely, which I think would be genuinely effing cool. I want to see Capcom characters running and stuff. And it was obvious that in old CVS games, KOF was the definitive influence. There was a lot of Fatal Fury stuff and Just Defending and all that kind of stuff in the groove system, but it, like, you played a 3v3 game if you wanted to, man. Ratio system aside, you were playing practically Capcom KOF. And that's fun, man. Like, that's really, I want to see Capcom characters short hopping and shit like it's MVCI again, dude. Let them do it. Sprites versus 3D models. You are never getting a sprite-based Capcom game ever again. They're too smart for that. I hate to tell you that I hate that. I hate to tell you that as much as I want a 2D Strider, that I wish that was a thing, they just won't do it. Sprites are number one expensive, hard to do. There's not as much expertise for them anymore, and the chance of it selling is less. What about Ghosts and Goblin? Ghosts and Goblins wasn't sprite-based. These are all 3D models, and they are just animated to look like puppets. If a CVS is the most likely, and Marvel vs. Capcom 4 is not happening. So, a few other franchises that are clear. Number one is Darkstalkers. I think the next most likely thing that could happen is a Darkstalkers situation. The problem with it is that there's all the financial kind of overhead that happens with Vampire Saviors or Darkstalkers of making it an appealing game. And there's been so much of not turning it into something new for such a long period of time that getting that information at a high level to approve a game could prove to be very challenging. Of just, okay, so if we're gonna budget a Darkstalkers game, how does that work out? Like, what can you actually pull from to get approval of something that's going to cost you, what, $40 to $50 million to make? Have it sell in similar fashion to like a lower Capcom game, like a Mega Man 11 or something like that. Like that would be rough. Darkstalkers seems like an unlikelihood, but also the next most likely thing. And then you have other things like Power Stone, Project Justice. It has to be low budget. Yeah, you're saying something that I'm echoing. I think Darkstalkers, Project Justice, and Rival Schools, pretty much like the last few Capcom sort of IPs and franchises that could maybe find success. I don't know if they could find that success in anything that costs over $30. Or $39.99. And that's like the rough part. I feel like the chance for those games actually finding their audience mostly comes from like collections and shit, which they did. Like they actually did that. And the way that they have done them was really good. Do you see Capcom outsourcing any of these IPs? If this was 10 years ago, 100%. The issue is that this is public information. Capcom's building another entire building in Japan. They're gonna have 3 buildings, like top to bottom buildings in Japan, full of developers making games. Over the past few years, and especially after what happened with RE3 and stuff, Capcom does everything in-house now. Everything. It seems pretty hard to get Capcom to produce anything that isn't like a big full price mega game. And honestly, Mega Man 12 is the first one we've seen in a while. Like the actual first time we've seen a game that this clearly is not going to be a $59.99, $69.99 Mega Man game. It's going to be something closer to what Mega Man 11 is. A reminder, Kunitsugami came out at full price. That being said, I start to think more about it, and the chance of any of those games coming back, I think, is nearly zero. So the ones that had a chance, the highest chance was MVC4, gone now. The next one was an eventual Capcom versus SNK. That makes the most sense. Doing a Street Fighter Alpha, which a couple of people have said, doesn't really make sense nowadays to split the audience up between the franchise from one to the other. Is Capcom versus Capcom not viable? The last few games we talked about was Power Stone, Asura's Wrath, Darkstalkers, Star Gladiator, I don't know, Project Justice, Rival Schools. Here's all of these games with these amazing characters and shit. And the one thing that we're not considering is the thing that like a lot of people have said for a long time, which is like the hope of what could this be in the future. The thing that we complained about that we literally talked to a bunch of Capcom people back in like the 2012 when it was clear that Ultimate Marvel 3 was donezo. What are the chances of them being like a brand new, like just Capcom game? Like Capcom Fighting Jam existed. There's been Capcom Fighting All-Stars things that happened in the past that never came out. Is there any possibility of just like a big Capcom game? Like an All-Stars 2? I don't know. And we've jokingly said Capcom versus Capcom for a long time. To me, that seems like also a high likelihood. I think the 3 games that could potentially come out that are Capcom fighting games in like the next 2 years or either announcement in the next 2 years or actually comes out. A brand new Capcom versus SNK, which I think is the most likely thing, or like an actual Capcom versus Capcom situation. What's happened now, and here's an interesting thing to think about. They have such a wild selection of IP to work with. Here's what's crazy about that. The amount of IP that Capcom has to work with now, people like these characters more than they did in like Marvel 3. Like the power of Capcom IP is exponentially greater than it was even back when the big Marvel versus Capcom games were happening and shit. Like, no kidding. Back when MVC2, MVC3 was a thing, Capcom wasn't doing nearly as good. If there was an opportunity for things to exist in the future, which is what we've been saying for years, like talking about a potential Capcom versus Capcom moment, then yeah, like that feels like maybe they don't need Marvel? We talk about Capcom versus Square Enix, but you have to start asking those questions like, what does Capcom cross over with that makes actual sense? Like, what do they cross over with? Street Fighter versus Mortal Kombat is honestly not a bad idea. Like, that's probably the next thing that you could see that could reach into that level of success, but those IPs don't collide in a way that makes any sense. Capcom versus Sega makes a ton of sense. Capcom versus Arc System Works could be really friggin' cool. But at the same point, it's like, I almost asked the question, does modern Capcom need to? And the more I this is what I've been sitting on as we've been talking about this shit for the longest time. Dude, I don't think Capcom needs it anymore, man. Like, I truly feel that at this point, with the power of Capcom on IP and how good they're doing and everything, and how many characters and games they have that people just find beloved, they can fill half of a roster of some launching game that potentially just could be Capcom IPs, and it would be all the popular shit, you know? It'd be all the mega popular Resident Evil characters and Capcom characters and all that shit. And then you can have the other half be all the fucking weirdos. Asura's Wrath and a whole bunch of Darkstalkers and a whole bunch of like Street Fighter characters would obviously be at the top because they're big and popular. With that being said, we've already seen them somewhat do this at the end of Street Fighter V and now a little bit with Street Fighter 6. They're reaching out to SNK to get SNK characters, and Street Fighter V was like, hey, maybe we can actually use a rival schools character. And that was the first time Capcom actually crossed over with something else that wasn't Final Fight, which Final Fight and Street Fighter are like connected at the hip. They reached over with something that wasn't Final Fight, and it was like, oh, dude, they put in a rival schools character into Street Fighter V. How well received was that? Very well received. In fact, people were very much into the fact that Akira was added to SF5. It was probably one of the things that greatly benefited the end of Street Fighter V's lifespan as being a very good fighting game at this point. I do feel that the likelihood of that happening anytime soon is still risky. It's still risky. It's less risky than obviously releasing individual Darkstalkers, Power Stone, any of that kind of stuff. But it's been a long time now, dude. Like, that's the only reason I'm thinking about this stuff. Now that the clear path of like the next MVC, nearly zero. Chances of Capcom vs SNK 3, pretty good. That's looking most likely right now. And then the next chances, which is not entirely at zero, but seems a little bit more risky, which is big Capcom IP fighter. Because why does Capcom even need to work into all these IPs? Do they even need to reach into the pockets of Square and Marvel and Sega? Like, do they need that now? The more I think about it, the more I think they don't. I think they got plenty of goddamn characters. They can make their own wild-ass Smash Brothers game. And that's my hope, where it's like, dude, if it isn't a Marvel vs. Capcom, then what do? We know what a CVS would be like. We know what an MVC would be like. If they do their own franchise game, how the hell does that play? All I gotta say is that I'm looking forward to the future. I'm looking forward to 2026 and possibly 2027. Ain't no way you have as much success as you have with Street Fighter 6 and you're not making another game. Like, there has to be another game of some kind. Are they eventually going to lean into the big crossover thing? Do they even need to? Because CVS is still a crossover. I hope we find out sooner than later.